Welcome back everybody to part 2 of our irrigation install. In this episode we run you through installing and getting a zone operational using this front section of our yard. If you missed part 1, we went through the design, the consideration and components which go to make up a typical irrigation system. So come along as we show you how the install's done and how it all works. Now this is the area that we'll be irrigating as part of that station we did the trial setup for in the shed. So you would have seen in the time lapse it was incredibly windy, there's leaves everywhere, but what we've done is we've pegged out the border so that we've got a reference that we can work to. Then I dig the trench out 150 mil from the edge that you're wanting to follow. So in the case of our property boundary, we come in 150 mil. In the case of our driveway edging down the side, we come in 150 mil, and it's the same thing with the curb in the background, we come in 150 mil. Now we just got to tidy up the trenches a little bit more, and then we'll go through and start placing the sprinklers in the position and getting them down to the correct height. Now once you've roughed in your trenches, it's time to get a T-piece, riser and pop-up assembly and put it in where you've marked for your sprinkler to be located. And what you will need to do is locally dig around the sprinkler assembly so that the riser can duct down into the ground and so that the head of the sprinkler is sitting pretty much flush with the soil line. You don't want it sitting at the top of the turf line, you want it sitting down below at the soil line. When these pop up, they push the grass away and they go around. When they come down, you want to make sure they're clear of any mowing surfaces that you've got. So it's a simple case of putting it in the trench. You might have to dig around where the elbows come out for the riser, but you'll normally find that it ends up being on a slight lean. Your pipe will run through and you've got to allow for the height of the riser and the sprinkler assembly. Now if you're doing smaller areas, the body of the sprinkler is a lot smaller and you don't need to dig down quite so far. We're using full body sprinklers, so we've got to do a fairly decent hole to put these in. You want to rough it in and then you lay your pipe and come back and firm it all up once it's all back together. So just note that the T-piece will sit further back from where you've put the mark for your sprinkler. That's perfectly fine, and you can do it whichever way you want. I always find it better to have the line running through on the inside and the riser and the sprinkler sitting on the outside of the circuit you're doing. but generally the sprinkler will sit roughly just to the outside of your line when you put it through. So now we'll just locally dig in. I find a little spade's really helpful because you don't want to take too much material out. You just gradually dig away, and remember, our soil is really sandy and soft. If you have clay or something like that, it's obviously going to be a lot harder. So we'll dig it down now and see how it works. One other thing to note is you don't have to dig the turf away. You can generally just excavate down under so that the riser then tucks in under the turf. And with a normal width that you've got, you only have to sort of just nip a little bit out, enough for this riser element sit down under the soil. And then you can adjust it up and down, sort of like making a little cave. Now when it comes to your corner junctions here, like we've got out on the street, just remember that you want, again, to locate the sprinkler in the corner, and the T-piece will sit further back on either side depending on which way you're planning on laying your pipe. You then have a small joiner that sits in between, and then an elbow that generally sits in line with the sprinkler. So just remember that when you're sort of laying it all out and planning it. The critical thing is getting your sprinkler into the corner. Also note, when you're flipping everything around, you can end up with a sprinkler on the outside. So just turn your fittings around and get it how you want, so you don't have to dig out too much. One other thing to note, I mean, we're using thick wall pipe, but I try to get as many of the rocks and debris out when you're digging as you possibly can. The last thing you want is the pipework rubbing on sharp rocks and eventually wearing through, or the same thing when you backfill over the top, it's got something that's abrasing up against it. So I do try to get as many of those rocks and pebbles out as I can. That's perfect. So now we'll go and do the rest of them. We've only got 6 on this circuit, so it sounds like a lot of time. Doesn't take very long at all. And then there's a case of laying your pipe in, which I'll show you. I just lay it basically side to side, and then you chop it up and use any offcuts for your little joiners. It's pretty easy to do. Just use your line of sight. There's usually enough give in the pipework to move it around and get it positioned right. So we've roughly run the pipe through now, and now it's time to insert your sprinkler and riser into the package. So what I do is I place it in, and then just mark it with my thumb, pull it back out, and that's where you want to cut the pipe. So on these, the outside collar comes off and the compression fitting is inside. So you want to make sure you put the collar down onto the pipe first, then the compression fitting, and it will pull up against the side of the T-piece like this. One important thing is when you insert the pipe in, there's a seal in there. You need to make sure you push it past that seal until it butts up against the back part of the assembly. You don't want to just push it in, you've got to push it in that little bit further so that it will seal up, and then you screw it all back together. So I'll put it down now, work out where we're going to cut, and as I said, it can jiggle around a little bit, you're not going to notice any difference. Put this in, get this side tightened up, then I'll do the other side, because what you'll find is it will twist the pipe a little bit as you're doing up the collar onto the fitting. And then that way you can keep adjusting it and turning the pipe as you're working your way around the circuit. So it's a simple case of putting it in, lining the sprinkler up with your mark that you've put on the ground, pull it back out, and then you get these handy pipe cutters. The irrigation shop will have them. And you just turn it around, cut the pipe. Now it's a case of putting the collar on first, then the compression fitting. Don't let it go all the way down like I just did. And then you want to make sure this is in all the way. And it's a simple case of sliding the compression fitting up so it butts onto the thread of the T-piece. Screw on the collar. And you'll notice as you're doing it, it grips and then it just wants to twist the pipe around with it. So I have a portable little caddy I take around with me, and it just has the little bits and pieces you need, and then another plastic container with all your fittings in it, already assembled, ready to go. Makes it nice and easy to quickly do each station as you're working along. Then I just use 2 of these vice grips essentially, just to do the final tightening on the collar or the nut that goes onto the compression fitting. Now, a lot of people say you can just do it by hand, but it does wind it on a fair bit more if you use some tools to do it. And you can see there's some tension in it. Just flick it back around and it takes all the tension out of the pipe. And then you just want to assemble this end and then move on to the next one. Fine, the second fitting, I just twist it on. It's going to keep turning the pipe around, but again, you fix it when you get to the other end. Sit it back in the trench. We'll come back through later, backfill portions of it and adjust the top, but you want to make sure there's no leaks or anything first. So if you're going to backfill at all, just make sure it's clear of the sprinkler. So if you need to pull it apart or anything, you haven't got all this dirt sitting over the top of it, which makes a nice muddy mess. On to the next one. So with the corner, the only difference with the corner is you cut your pipe, you'll have a little bit left over, and you use that to extend from the other side of the T up to the elbow, which is roughly sort of in line with your sprinkler head. You'll see as we go. Now when you get to these corners, because you've still got another 2 sprinklers already connected to it, you kind of have to force it or manipulate it around on the pipe. Quite often you can't unravel the tension on the pipe. You literally have to slide it around on the collar just to get it in the right position so it's not all buckled and twisted and stuff like that. And you just want to sit it back in again. Get your elbow and do the same thing. You just want to measure the length of pipe in between the 2 fittings, cut that and put them all together. Gets a little bit tight working around in the corner, but you can get it done. Well, I tend to make this piece a little bit longer than what I measure because it's easier to cut a little bit off than having to go and get another bit of pipe and recut it. Also just check how you've put your sprinkler together. I've just noticed I've put this with the riser on the opposite side. It's not a big issue, but it does make it harder to do the elbow. So I'll just adjust that now and swap it back around, and then we'll be right to go. So it's a simple case of twisting it around, tightening the fittings back up, and you're ready to go. So here you can see the assembly process. I've got my elbow, I've got the compression fitting slid down onto the pipe, and then the collar or the screw fitting goes on first. And then you push it in and you can just feel it binding up. And then you push it all the way in and then adjust your compression fitting up so it's sitting flush. And then tighten it all up together. And now you just want to put this onto the end of the T, and then we're ready to put the other bit of pipe in and head to the other corner. Then while it's out of the hole, it's easy to twist the elbow around so it's roughly sitting perpendicular with everything else, so you're ready to connect the other side up. I'm going to leave this out so I can come around and do this other pipe and then push it all down in one assembly. So the corners are a little bit fiddly, but once you get your corners done, you're pretty much finished. And here we have an assembled corner. So you've got your pipe coming in, here's your T with your riser that comes off, the small joiner piece that sits in between, your elbow, and then the pipe that runs to the opposite side of the circuit. Apologies for the lighting, but once you sit it down in here, so you can adjust the riser up and down and move the sprinkler head from side to side and front to back to get it all nice and vertical so that your sprays are nice and neat when you bring them out. Okay, now we're getting very, very close. We're not quite ready. Everything's all connected all the way through to our manifold. But before you want to go and do a test, you want to, if they haven't already got them, put the nozzle that you require in there. I'm going to try a low nozzle this time, and it's a 2.0, which means it shouldn't shoot quite so far as some of our larger ones. We've got a slightly narrower area here, and I just want to try to tighten it down a little bit. So I'm going to try some of the low nozzles this time, and to be honest, Hunter have some really good DIY tutorials on all their sprinkler heads. So have a look at them in regards to how you correctly adjust them. But in this case, what I generally do is when I'm doing 90 degrees or 180, you want to get the point to the lock, and then you turn it around so it's spraying to the side of where you want it to stop. And then they give you a key that you can put in, and then you can adjust the sweep of it in regards to, you know, 30 degrees, 90 degrees, 60 degrees, however you want it to go around. So in this instance, we're going to do a 180 degree sweep on this sprinkler. So I'm going to adjust that so I can turn it around, lift the head of the sprinkler up, put the nozzle in, and move on to the other one. So we'll adjust these now, and then the last thing to do will be to pull one of the corner sprinklers out, run the system for a few minutes to flush it all out, then we'll put it back in, adjust its sweep, and then do a test run and see how we're going. So we flushed out the lines now. We'll do the final test. Make sure there's no leaks before we cover it all back in. Now's a perfect opportunity to come through. Once you've got your irrigation all running and operating properly, to come through, do a top dress, fertilise it, get your lawn 100% healthy again. Anyhow, we'll go through, we'll do a final test. Make sure our sprinklers are orientating in the same way. You'll notice sometimes when you adjust them, they do tend to move from time to time. So just go through, do a double check, make sure they're actually turning the wrong way and not firing over to your neighbour's house somewhere, or spraying on your house and washing your car and all that sort of thing. And then you want to go around, what I do is I focus on the sprinklers straight away to get them all nice and true and straight, and then backfill from there on. And here's the maiden run. No, it's all a little bit wonky at the moment because nothing is firmed up. But it's just making sure that we've got water coming out of all the sprinklers. And I'm just going to go and quickly check to make sure there's no leaks now. The last thing I want to show you is a solenoid onto the manifold. I'm cheating at the moment, I'm just using the ball valve that we used to have on there. But we'll get that set up in the morning. Backfill all of this, and the job's done. We've got another 3 zones to do, but you guys don't need to watch that. Look at that. Beautiful. Now it's been a few weeks since we did the install out the front and we finished all the outside, and to be honest, I forgot to film where we're swapping all the ball valves over with the solenoids because we're trying to get it done in between all these other jobs and my work, and leading up to Christmas it's been extremely busy. So this manifold connects to our spear point pump, which is located in the shed on the other side of this wall with a controller above. So it's a nice compact little unit that sits side by side on either side of this wall. We've adapted this over the years, going from a 3-port manifold that was manually operated using a series of ball valves such as this, to this 8-port manifold which has the 7 solenoids, and we still have a manual ball valve here for a tap circuit we run around the backyard. I think it's best practice to also put in a manual ball valve at the inlet to the manifold so you can switch it off whenever you need to complete maintenance on this end. The alternate solution is you get one of these in-ground boxes that has a removable cover on it. So you simply insert this portion into the ground, drill your holes where you need to run your pipe and cabling into, and then your solenoids simply sit inside this chamber underground close to the zone that you're operating. So as I discussed in the first episode, you then need to run your cabling back through your trenches to your controller wherever that might be located. Now when it comes to installing these solenoids, it's a very simple process. This is what we call a metric connection, and that fits onto most of your standardized manifolds. You then have an adapter on the bottom which connects to your pipework depending on what you're using, and it simply acts as an electronic ball valve. Now typical solenoids have a flow control, and you can manually switch them on and off by rotating the solenoid assembly here. Now from a wiring point of view, it's very, very simple. You've got two wires that come out of the solenoid that are unmarked. So one goes to the common, which gets connected all together through each of your solenoids and goes back to the controller. And the second is a switching wire. So it will go to a specific color that you choose at this end, and then it connects up that corresponding color to the switching terminal on your controller, and it controls the output of when the solenoid turns on and off. Now what we've used here is a multi-core cable, which most irrigation suppliers will be able to provide to you, or you go down to your electrical wholesaler. So here we use black as a common, and then each of the coloured wires is specific for every individual solenoid. So one particular colour, in this case, is blue. That might be zone 1, and that gets wired to the zone 1 terminal on your controller. It's really very, very simple. A lot of people seem to use these gel-filled connectors as well. So it's a simple case of putting the wires in and then crimping them down, and they've got a waterproof gel inside them. Now we've still got to wire up the solenoids we did as part of these external stages. So we'll continue the wiring that we're doing here. I've got a junction box that they all generally get housed inside, and then I run this conduit back, keep it all nice and tidy, up to the controller. Now to keep everything all nice and tidy and protected from the weather, I've got one of these plastic outdoor storage units that I've simply left the back out of, and it simply sits over our manifold like so. We'll go through and level this up somewhere along the line, but it allows easy access into all your gear underneath, and you can store some other garden or watering implements in here as well. Moving back into the shed, we've got this Hunter X-Core 8-station controller. Now I say, do your research and select a controller that best suits you. Our wireless connectivity over here in the shed isn't fantastic, so we've gone what I would call an analog system. It's a very basic controller where you program all your settings and stations through the controller. The next option from here is to go a wireless controller where you get an app on your phone and you can control everything remotely. The one big downfall with a basic controller like this is you don't really have any remote control. So if you're away and for whatever reason the weather patterns change, you can't just jump in and change the settings on this particular controller. Now one upgrade we're going to do over the next few weeks is fit this rain sensor. So at least if you're away and it starts pouring down rain, you don't get messages from your neighbours saying your sprinklers are on and it's raining. So there are accessories you can plug into all these controllers to make them a little bit more adaptable and user-friendly, particularly if you're away. From a wiring point of view, it's very, very simple. The multi-core cable I run up through into a conduit, and all your cabling is connected through this portal inside the controller, and it's very, very simple. Each of your coloured cables goes onto the corresponding number for the zone you wish to control, and your common then goes in to the front portion of the controller panel. In our case, we run a separate circuit from our switchboard in the shed, and this controls the pump, which is located down below, as well as this controller, so it's on its own independent circuit. So it's really quite simple. From a setup point of view, like the pop-ups, I find it really, really helpful to go through the online tutorials that most of these manufacturers have for their particular panels. That'll run you through the setup process, the programming, and other little controls that you might not even know about. And it's much easier than trying to flick through and read the pages in the manual. So that's my one big tip. I won't go through all the details in this video, but with your particular controller, your pop-ups and all your gear, there's so much online information around and video tutorials that lets you run through all this stuff and makes it so very, very simple. And that concludes the series. I hope you learnt a lot along the way, as we did as we were doing it ourselves. As we said at the start, there's many different ways to approach this. Have a go yourself, talk to a few irrigation experts. There's people online that can help you out as well. But most of all, make sure what you're going to do will suit your block of land, your lawn type, your soil type, and the environmental conditions you're working with. Please like, subscribe, and comment below with any feedback you've got. Most of all, get out there, stay safe, and have fun. Thanks for watching.